Everybody got a little tea and a blankie and a bicky? So we just have a little short stint before lunch, and that was a very interesting, unexpected discussion on the mentor, which I greatly appreciate, and I'm so glad that you decided to speak up. So let's try to continue that. I'm very open to moving in the direction of where the interest is and not just providing a kind of talk. So. You remember what the first preliminary is? Create a space. Second preliminary? Yes. So for the altar, we had 3 items on the altar which represent the kind of body and mind that you're trying to develop. But then you also have a practice called the water bowl offerings, which you have the water bowls here, which is the practice of generosity. It's actually the practice that I'm not teaching my 4-year-old son Bodhi any mindfulness meditation. I teach him the water bowl practice, because I think as that age, the tactile, being active, and so he's like, "Daddy, can I give water to the Buddha?" He likes that. It's kind of like a fun thing. I mean, it makes a bit of a mess, but. But it's a lovely practice, and it's described in the book, and I think it's an accessible thing once you understand what you're really trying to do there. And also the power of the mind to transform simple water. Like, it doesn't cost us anything, water, to give. And so karmically, there's no sense of stinginess or like reservation about it. You can give it freely, because we have abundance of it. But if you were living in a place where water was scarce, you could give sand, for example, and just transform it with your mind. The main part is just how beautiful the mind is, because the water can be transformed into sacred nectars. And so you get the karmic benefit of imagining that. And I had a friend ask me, well, what if I couldn't buy my wife a ring? Would I just be able to imagine it? I'd say, that's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. If you couldn't, and yet you loved her so deeply that you imagined that you would give her like a palatial palace and wonderful jewels, it would be an indication of how much you valued her, even in your mind. You get the karmic benefit for that. I think that's probably one of the symptoms of overly reductionistic societies. We really don't understand how powerful our creativity is, what kind of impact it has on our mind, on our psyche. The third preliminary is the body and mind, the preparation for body and mind, this posture and the taking of refuge and the development of the altruistic intention. And then the fourth one is where we got into our discussion about the mentors, is to evoke the mentor. And there, right before that, in that step, is also where you do your dissolution. So in the visualization, the dissolution is to imagine that the entire world picture dissolves into emptiness. That's actually a very critical step, because it is the rehearsal of the death process. So there's a built-in mechanism in your visualization practice that prepares you for death. So the sense of solidity, and there is a very traditional 8-step death meditation. Have you guys done the 8-step death dissolution meditation? It's very intense. Where you go through each step and the 5 elements dissolve, and then the 3 kinds of mind dissolve, and at each step there is a sign that appears. And the way that, if you ever get a chance to do this, it is actual road signs for your own death process, so that it alerts you to it orients you to what's happening while you're dying. And when my father died of cancer 10 years ago now, visually I could see the steps happen. And that actually put me at ease because I knew where along the line he was. So for example, when the earth element dissolves, then there's a sense of, the sense of solidity gives way. And when the water element dissolves, like for example, the mouth dries up. Things like that, mucus dries up. Anyway, so that whole phase can be packed into the fourth preliminary, and it's actually a very important thing because we're all going to die and we're ill prepared for it in our culture, in our society. And so to reacquaint yourself with a world picture in which the dissolution of the body is not going to lead to the nihilistic abyss of the materialistic paradigm, but actually to the clear light as an opportunity, is a much different picture of the world. And I think so much unnecessary stress is created by the world picture of nihilism, because when you're coming to death, you're feeling like you're going to fall off a precipice into nothing, you're going to become nothing. So there's the dissolution that leads to the Dharmakaya, that point of consciousness that you're floating in a vast sea of emptiness or luminosity. And it would be okay, it would be the practice of Mahamudra, for example, if you just stayed there and practiced as a point of consciousness, aware of the emptiness of things without any fabrication, without any without having any mental meditative object, just recognizing the natural state of things and resting there. But because we're venturing into the territory of preparation for Tantra, then after you've had your dissolution phase, then you arise in a hologram body. And you then create a sublime environment in this case, and just this one rendition or interpretation of the visualization. It's called the Jewel Tree Refuge, with the valley and the sky and the tree. And then your mentor comes, and now this is considered the Sambhogakaya. Have you heard these terms, Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya? So the Dharmakaya is the mind of the Buddha, or the mind realizing the ultimate nature of things, which is emptiness, the lack of inherent existence. So when you dissolve your body and your associations and your fixations, you arrive at an open luminosity, and you reacquaint your mind with the ability to just rest openly in one's nature, which is the expression of Dharmakaya. So you're reacquainting your mind with the Dharmakaya in the visualization at that stage. Then you arise as a hologram body, and basically this is the mandala. And this is then, and when the harmonics are there when we do our mantra. So we have the mandala, the visual space, we have the deity or the mentor archetype. Then you have your hologram body, and then you have the energetic body, which is the resonance that's happening of the mantra. This is all the Sambhogakaya, what Bob Thurman calls the body of beatitude, or the bliss body. And then you go through your bonding process, or you do kind of this unarresting of arrested development and the continuation of the childhood development with a more available parent, replicated through this interaction, you can say, which is called the seven-step process, seven-step bonding process. And we'll go through the slides of that. You do all seven of them, and then you remember that it's just empty. That's very important. What happens if you don't remember that it's empty? You can get carried away like Geshe Michael Roach did in the United States, where he started masquerading as Vajrayogini in real life, telling his students he had reached enlightenment. Very dangerous. So you just always remember it's a simulation. Your mind is powerful. It can create a nightmare. How many of you experienced your own nightmare creation? Both hands right here. But if it's possible to do that, then it must also be possible to create a more enriched environment. An enriched environment is a term that comes out of health psychology, where they discovered that they were doing some experiments. Larry Sherwitz was doing some experiments with lab rats, and he had a bunch of them. And he had too many of them that one day his daughter was in the laboratory and she saw there were many at home. And she took care of them. And she was young, so she started taking care of them as if they were pets. And when Larry was at home with his daughter and seeing the rats, he noticed that they were acting peculiarly. So he brought some of those back to the lab and he compared them. And in comparison to the lab rats, their brains had grown in a short amount of time. And that is where they discovered this term, enriched environment, that if the brain is in a safe environment and stimulated with soothing vibrations, that the natural ability for it to grow is enhanced. So this is an incubator. Literally, the visualization is an incubator for your, not only for your psychic development, but also for your brain. And I think people are just so skeptical. They think, oh, you mumbo jumbo, like my colleague from Mexico. I did this workshop in Toronto where I invited him, and he just was wriggling in his chair the entire time, just could not get into it. But I'll give him a year, maybe two, soften him up a little, especially if you keep giving him the neuroscience behind it. So you've done your dissolution, you re-arise as your hologram, you're in the mandala, the deity is there, or the archetype is there, or the mentor is there. The energetic source is there. You are now in the Sambhogakaya. You go through the 7-step bonding process. Then you remember it's all empty and that it's not truly existent from its own side, so then you dissolve it. And this is very helpful preparation for Tantra, because you dissolve the world and then you recreate the world, and you dissolve the recreation of the world and then you reappear to the world, but you have an inclination now that that world is less concrete than when you started. So there is this song, I can't remember who it's from. I think it might be Donovan, maybe you don't know it, but one of the lyrics is, first there's a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is a mountain again. Have you heard that before? First there is no mountain, or first there is a mountain is our current state of condition where everything is concretely real as it is. So your suffering exists inherently as intractable and unfixable, and you're a neurotic, unlovable, unworthy person, nothing we can do about it, and we're in a crisis, and so you better like go shopping on Black Friday because we don't know if we're going to exist tomorrow. Then you get into spirituality, and spirituality reorients you to the fact that things that are appearing the way they are and I don't actually exist that way, that they're much more fluid, and everything is empty. Everything is open. Nothing is the way it appears. So the mountain disappears. And people can get stuck in that. We were talking about that yesterday. When there is no mountain, the danger of staying where there is no mountain is that you are no longer engaged with the world. You become spiritually apathetic and unengaged. And equally fixated as you were on the intrinsic existence of things, equally fixated on the absence of the existence of things. Both of them maintain a fixation. One in the positive and one in the negative. So there's an absence of fluidity there. So your practice is like an asana, a yoga sequence, vinyasa krama, where you dissolve, re-arise, create an enriched environment to help you develop, enrich your brain, but then don't get fixated there and let it dissolve again like a dance, and then the mountain appears again. You come back into your body, the ordinary world reappears, but something inside of you has shifted now. Now you can perceive the world with this, like an artistic quality. It's like a painting. It's not so unreal that it's not, don't bother, but it's not too real that there's nothing you can do about it. So they call these movements the space-like equipoise samadhi. The space-like equipoise samadhi is when you make the movement from there is a mountain to there is no mountain, dissolving ordinary appearances that appear fixated to you to the fact that they don't exist the way that they appear. They're empty, they're open, they're fluid. That is the space-like equipoise samadhi. That's when you concentrate your mind on the fact that they're open. They're open to be repainted. Then you go through the reconstruction of the world in a more sublime state, and you bathe like a tea bag in the hot water, you bathe your brain in that love or that nutrient. And then you remember that's not totally real either. That's not fully it. That's just a better version. And so you dissolve again. And then you're a point of consciousness looking back, and then there's your body, and you have an opportunity to reacquaint your body and manifest in the world based on your bodhisattva resolve. And that is called the Nirmanakaya. So you have the Dharmakaya, the mind of the Buddha, the Sambhogakaya, the body of beatitude or bliss, and the Nirmanakaya, the manifestation. Nirmanakaya, emanation body. So all of you right now are the emanation body of your bodhisattva intent. You're in the world, but you're in the world in a new kind of way. You're seeing the world as a new kind of possibility with much more fluidity and creativity. Even though forms have reappeared and they look concrete, there is the beginning or the dawning of an understanding that they're much more fluid. And that is called the illusion-like aftermath samadhi. So the space-like samadhi is when things dissolve. The illusion-like aftermath is when they reappear, but now there is a deeper creativity based on the understanding that things are more fluid, an intuitive alignment with things are more fluid. And what would that actually manifest about is, I like to think that creativity is the result of a deeper understanding of emptiness. If you see detachment, I think that is the manifestation of an inaccurate understanding of emptiness. If you find that people are more aloof, I don't think that they have understood emptiness correctly. If you find that people are more engaged and they come up with solutions or they engage in creative ways, that is because they have aligned their intuitions with possibility. And that's because they have tasted that things are not what they appear to be. They can think outside the box. They're not rigid. So creativity is a great indicator. So this is all within the fourth preliminary. The fifth preliminary then is when you actually go through the so now we're in the mandala with the archetype, and there is a 7-step process. Can we have the next slide, Lou? So here we go. I said that if you wanted to reduce for your non-Buddhist friends the entire purpose of the Dharma, this is the entire purpose of the Dharma. There is a famous slogan, to eliminate vice, cultivate virtue, and subdue the mind or train the mind. This is the path of the awakened. Something like that. Have you heard that one? How do you translate it? Yes. It's in the book? Is it in the book?
Yeah, it's in the prayers.
Yeah, so I think that's the pith instruction of the entire 10,000 teachings of the Buddha. They all come down to eliminating a negativity, cultivating virtue, and training your mind. This is the path of the awakened. So they are the heart of the 6 preliminaries. Next slide. So to serve as an antidote to our, do you guys use the term jaded? Yeah. So skepticism or jaded or highly individualistic, imagine that these are adaptations that, what if underneath them they were adaptations to self-preservation in the face of challenge? And now our culture prides them as like sources of competency. So there's a cultural reinforcement that's saying, well, if you're you're buried under there. Maybe the only class we need is Tummo practice or something. We have lost our awe. I think that's what our discussion was really about, is familial and cultural conditionings have left us deprived of the ability to learn from other people. It's funny because I was watching a documentary on cheese making in Italy. Don't ask me how I got there. But they still have this long tradition where they know that there are masters that hold a kind of sacred knowledge, like cheese is not just cheese is cheese there, you know. And it's made in caves, and the weather conditions and the wind patterns and the seasons and the length and duration and it's not fermentation, what would it be? The ripening process, all of this is it's both an art and a sophisticated science. And in order to establish that, you have to learn from a master. And of course, in Italy these days, who the hell wants to learn that? You know, what they want to do is they want to go to a vending machine and put a coin in and get a chocolate bar, the students and the kids in Italy, you know, in every, you know, the tradition of spending time nurturing an art and a craft and a science that was handed down probably from parent to child, that legacy is a lineage. That's the same thing in the spiritual world of a lineage. You learn from a master, and because you value the art and craft that can only be delivered by way of proximity and role modeling. This is what I was saying with Geshe Tenzin Zopa. It's not enough to hear his recording. His recordings are amazing, and if that's all you can get access to, it's already a leg up to have the internet, and where you can, if you lose your Lama Tashi Tsering in Sarah and he gives a lecture somewhere, you can still access that lecture. Or I'm sure he gave you enough lectures in his tenure here to last your bloody life. And to refresh you, you might go back to the archive and get the recording. But the biggest gift he gave you was and it'll make me cry, and I've never even met him. But the biggest gift he gave you here was his embodiment. And it's rare to have someone like that. It's very rare. So that's the important thing. That's the download. It comes from the embodiment. And we've lost that possibility with our armoring and our defensiveness and our skepticism and our individuation. Now, it's also true in Michelle's case that keeping the inferior position in order to download something from someone who has something you don't yet have is not the end point. It's not the goal. It's just the beginning. It's like the opening of the door after a long period of being defended. Someone used a word, I forgot your name. Cynthia used the word vulnerability. So this is about vulnerability. Okay, next slide. And once you have that rapport and that vulnerability, then you create reciprocity. So once the guard, the fortress walls have come down, like, so you've been wounded, right? And you constructed a wall and you've told yourself, I don't need anybody, get away from me. But you stopped growing. And we will take that price. We will definitely take that price. Pain is the greatest, contributor to our erecting of walls and our justification for a fortress. We will sacrifice any further learning as long as we will stay safe. That is clear. But if you can leverage past, you see, the problem with trauma is it gets generalized. When you get hurt, you go, everybody's out to get me. And that is an adaptation that the brain is making in order to keep itself safe. It exaggerates the danger. So if a dog bites you, all dogs are dangerous. Just like that. Boom. And if you don't work to see through that and retrain that and recondition that can become your fortress, protecting you unnecessarily. And then some part of you stops growing because you're hypervigilant now. And if you're in hypervigilant mode, your brain is not capable of processing new information. So once you have rapport established and you have the vulnerability where the heart is open, now you create reciprocity. And the way that you do that, and the way that we have done that across the course of evolution since we had civilization, and maybe before that, is through the exchange of goods. When you are asked over for dinner from your friend's house, you often bring something, don't you? Right? You bring flowers, or you bring a cake, or you bring something. Why do you do that? You do that because you know your host is also cooking for a couple of hours for dinner. And so they have an energy investment, and you'd like to bring your energy investment, and then there's an exchange. And when you have that exchange, something inside of you feels not willing, but entitled, which maybe is a disturbing word in many other contexts, but you feel entitled to receive because you've given something. This is often what is the transactional piece in a therapy office, is you make a payment and your therapist gives you advice or counsel. There's an interaction. And that creates a kind of reciprocity, circuitry. Next one. So once you have rapport and admiration and the vulnerability, and you have the link of reciprocity, then you have the preconditions of safety. And there's this beautiful, out of neuroscience, the work of Dr. Dan Siegel. Have you heard of Dan Siegel? Has he come? He must have come to London. He's really popular. Do you ever have here at Jamyang non-Buddhist people come? Yeah. Science and psychology and stuff? Not often.
Maybe hard to
Dan is an incredible pioneer, visionary. He's done extraordinary things with his work. But one thing is he's made clear is that there's a link between our brains that's invisible, that he calls the resonance circuitry, that comes out of attachment theory, where a caregiver and a child's brains are linked intimately in order for there to be the relay of information between the infant and the parent. So when the infant is in distress, they send a signal that then hits the caregiver, and the caregiver, through empathy, understands what the child needs and serves as an auxiliary nervous system while the child is developing. So the mother, for example, her nervous system is attuned enough to recognize what the needs are so that she acts as a counterbalance for the energy in the system of the infant. She can calm or down-regulate the system if it's too aroused, or she can coo and excite the infant if it's subdued. So she's like a rudder and sail for the infant during a period of development, and it's all based on a circuitry system that's invisible. It's natural brain linkage. So signal comes down, hits the parent, it is processed, and the energy or an information flow is returned. And there's a kind of balancing act being created to regulate the energy system of the being until such a time that the nervous system itself has established its own ability to do it. So healthy attachment, uninterrupted healthy attachment is designed, and this goes to your question, John, perhaps one of the facilities of the mentor is to create the internal environment for the regulation of flow of energy and information in the student to the sufficient point that they can regulate themselves. Once they regulate themselves, then they can serve as an auxiliary nervous system to help other people, and that should be their function. Maybe they don't become the guru, But certainly, I panic on planes, and when there's turbulence, and I had a pilot in one of my classes come up to me and say, "You have nothing to worry about. It's just like choppy water, and when you're sailing, it's totally natural. The plane's not going to go down. Don't worry." But on the plane, what I do is I look at the faces of the flight attendants because they're bored. They're not afraid. They're like, "Oh, here we go again. I guess I have to put the cart back into the back," and like, "Here we go." Well, once in a while, there was one time where one of the flight attendants got freaked out, and then I got freaked out. But it's an example of like how the facial recognition and temperament and disposition of this other person becomes the source of my own internal, regulating my own internal environment. So that face over there that's looking at me, all your faces, like if you get bored in my class, or I get a few students that start to do like, like head for the door, then my nervous system will register that, and I'm supposed to adjust to it. But normally I just get freaked out by it. And like my inner child goes, "Oh no, I'm being boring. They don't like it. They're not going to come back." Yeah. But I'm supposed to go, "Oh, so they're getting a bit tired. We should do something different, or we should increase the energy a little bit. We should redirect or pick it up a notch, be more dynamic," or something like that. So there's like a feedback loop. But once you have this feedback loop, then one of the major stages here is to do what's called a confession, but the word confession is so loaded that we can use other kinds of words, which has to do with the purification process. And technically, this is where you could insert the 4 opponent powers. Have you done your class on the 4 opponent powers in Vajrasattva? We don't have time for it today, but even just the acknowledgement that there is some limitation in your mind that you're working on, and the act of disclosing takes it out of your fortress and makes it open. What you're doing is taking it out of the realm of the unconscious, where it is having maximal impact out of sight and out of mind beyond the recognition of your conscious mind. By disclosing it, you're not only bringing it to consciousness, but you're taking it out of your fortress of shame, your shame bubble, and you're allowing someone to see it, which is almost like exposing a wound. There's something very powerful about human beings where they share that vulnerability. It'd be one thing to know yourself. It's already an accomplishment to know that you have this wound, that you are making what is unconscious conscious and taking it out of denial. But it's another thing to share that vulnerability and to have another human being witness it without judgment. This is really critical, because most of our apparatus of defense has come by way of not only there being the incident or the impact of trauma, but also the judgment. This is like when you get beaten by a parent and then they blame you, and then you learn that it's your fault. Or that women that are sexually abused have their culture say, well, it's because of how you provocatively you dress. That's a second arrow. It's a second insult to the injury. You follow me? Yeah, so there's not only the injury, now there's secondary shame built on top of it, which is very unfortunate. And that shame then kind of makes a coat around the wound and preserves it and keeps it active. So there is this necessity then to not only to raise the wound to conscious level, but then also to have somebody else witness it. And the way that the witnessing happens is without judgment. Very Carl Rogers, non-judgmental. It's very important for us, because the whole thing is based on mirroring. At least from this psychoanalytic model or perspective on the sadhana, on the meditative process. It is all based on mirroring, that a child's development is based on seeing the parent, seeing themselves reflected in the eyes of the parent. Like your value and your worth is determined by the facial and behavioral responses to you. So we're not created in isolation, we are created in relation. And if you do something and mommy and daddy praise you, then you learn to feel competent and good about yourself. That is a natural and necessary ingredient to child development, validation. That's how you get worth. But then you can get stuck there constantly trying to track down validation unless you have firmly established your own sense of internal reward. I'm good enough for the things that I do. I'm good enough for who I am would be the next step after that. I don't have to do anything special. Now this may all conflict with teachings on selflessness, right? Because we're talking about the establishment of a healthy sense of self or a healthy sense of ego. But I actually think that we do ourselves a disservice by jumping too far into the selflessness teachings without first having a thorough understanding of the sense of competence and worth. I think that's a disadvantage to the Buddhist teachings. Yeah.
How does it work with employment and having a sense of worth in that respect? Everybody has praise from superiors, and that's something that you're trying to attain, or if you're a creative person, you need an audience for that feedback loop to continue.
Mm-hmm.
How does that operate if it's say this, how do you generate your own self-worth if you also need that appraisal from superiors or outside forces?
Yeah, so you do need it. That's what my point is we are so averse to feeling like we need it. At first, we do actually need it. We do need praise. We do need to feel competent. This is what I'm saying about mirroring, is the way that the self develops is in a mirror of other people. But we don't want that. It's like we don't want to deal with that. But what I'm saying is that that's part of our mechanism. That's part of our evolutionary apparatus. So if we're really into the work of unfreezing our arrest and proceeding, then we have to accept that this is just part of the mechanism, but we have to proceed cautiously. So one of the elements is we choose the wrong people to validate and mirror us. We choose abusive partners, we choose neurotic bosses, we stay too long in relationships that are unhealthy. I call it the distorted funhouse mirror effect. And so if you've been to the circus, they're the wall of mirrors. Okay, so if the whole process of self-development is occurring within a mirror, but you choose the wrong kind of people to reflect you, it's like looking in the funhouse mirror where your waist is that big, but it's actually not that big, but you believe it's that big. Right? So people who have had unfortunate circumstances in childhood have a kind of imprint. We could call it a karmic imprint. They now have a predilection and a tendency and a gravitational habit towards replicating what they have known, even if what they have known has been unpleasant. So if you have received negative criticism or you have received conditional kinds of love, like at work, you only feel good if you produce at 110%, like in America. 100% is not enough anymore. There's no such thing as a 9 to 5 anymore. Right? So you're only really validated and productive if you exceed. So now actually your self-esteem is terrified. It actually is reinforcing a sense of deficiency. But if you found healthier people that were reasonable and they provided non-judgmental love and unconditional love, it wouldn't be about what you were producing. It would just have a sense of dignity. You'd just have unconditional sense of dignity with them. Like parents are supposed to reprimand the behavior but always send the message that, oh, we love you. This isn't acceptable, we love you. But it's hard to do it. It's hard to do it. But then you have to start doing that yourself so that you're kind of mentoring yourself along the process where you deliver a lecture or a piece of artwork or a performance piece and you don't get that criticism or praise, or you don't get the praise that you're expecting, whatever. But inside you know your own level of integrity and you feel good about that. Regardless of the outcome, you feel like it was a good job. I remember in basketball when I was growing up, it's not about winning, it's how you play the game. So you keep telling yourself, I just did the best that I can, I just did the best that I can, I just did the best. I'm good enough. It was good enough. It was a good effort. I don't know, was there equivalent that you could say back, good effort? Good on you?
We're very good at coming second in this country.
it's funny. Okay, here's like this cultural, maybe, I don't want to call it impasse because it's not impassable, but maybe it's one of the conflicts. According to the teachings of the Buddha about self-cherishing, that would be a good thing. But my problem is if it's really based on the fact that you don't value yourself, it's actually reinforcing a lack of dignity in the guise of being a more compassionate, selfless person. To me, that's problematic. To me, that creates a gravitational drag in your actual development. And I don't know if the lamas spot it. I don't know. Like one of the conversations we had with Geshe Tenzin Zopa, I think Westerners are stumping some of the lamas in some things. I have to say that, because it's just a new culture. They have been raised and their students have come from a different cultural matrix and they have different needs and predilections. And some of the students were talking about anger. Now, the classic Tibetan Buddhist or Buddhist approach to anger is that's the biggest no-no in the book, you know? And yet, from psychotherapy point of view, we're very, very clear that if you stuff your anger, it turns into depression. And if you exaggerately express your anger, it just reinforces the release that you get. Like in the 1970s, they would say, if you're really angry, go down into the basement and take a pillow and punch the shit out of it. And you'd abreact and get it all off your chest. But what they found out was the temporary relief that you got from punching it meant that the next time you were angry, you were 10 times more likely to punch something. And one day it's not a pillow, it's your wife or husband. See what I'm saying? So we've discovered in psychology that suppressing anger and expressing them are neither of them are good. But staying with your anger and recognizing that maybe underneath it, anger is communicating a particular need that's not being met, and then learning how to negotiate and communicate that need, that is considered the healthier thing to do. Well, there's a cross-cultural impasse there when you talk to the lamas about this kind of thing. And this is another one about so-called destroying yourself or destroying your ego. The whole point of the Buddhist path is not to have an ego. And yet you have people who have been deeply traumatized, or they come from a cultural matrix or milieu where the self-esteem is damaged and there's an absence of dignity and an absence of a positive worthiness. And then the teachings of selflessness are presented and the teachings of altruism are presented, but lingering underneath is a lack of self-esteem. It becomes problematic. Now you have people who are masquerading as bodhisattvas, but secretly they're reinforcing their lack of dignity.
They have a fixed idea of themselves that is as a secondary person, an unimportant person, and they're acting that out.
Yes, but on the outside it looks nice because you're getting a cup of tea for the lama and you're serving your community because you're second. You know what I'm saying?
Very recognizable in my experience.
Well, it's in all experience. That's what I was saying, that the whole group on the pilgrimage, they were all too happy to be second to everybody else. But then if you scratch the surface, what's underneath it? If you ask me why, can I do something for you? I'll say, oh, no, I'll take care of myself. But really, if you ask me why, I don't want to burden you with my bullshit. You know what I mean?
It's like that. Someone asks you how you're doing, and if you actually tell them the truth, you can see in their face.
Too much information. Too much information.
It's quite interesting, that angry things. I think it feeds into that. If you look at, I always think of Bob Geldof and Live Aid. Those of us who were around in the Ethiopian famine of whenever it was, in the 1980s. And he was so angry about the fact that the West had decided this communist regime was going to be allowed to starve, and people were dying by the tens of thousands, that he just energized this fantastic charitable effort, and tens of millions of pounds raised, and it was all from anger, because when you heard him, but it was totally controlled. It wasn't. He wasn't burning down buildings.
But he was expressing injustice.
He was expressing this wanting justice for these people. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. That,
Yeah.
you know, someone could do it. I couldn't do that. I'm just,
Yeah.
impossible. But it was so inspiring that someone can do that, and that's really engaging with the world
Mm.
and using. I mean, because I've never really understood this tantric thing about use the negative emotions. But there's an example.
There is.
Where you are using it. You're using it, engaging with the world.
Yeah.
Really positive.
Yeah. And Geshe Tenzin Zopa said that. He said, for sutra practice, anger is poison. For tantra practice, you can use anger. So that's an example, maybe, where he would say there's an exception to that. That there's a way, if you can control it and not let it burn you and not let it burn others, but be fuel for a greater cause, then maybe it's possible. But for most of us who are untrained, anger is one of the most destructive forces. So maybe that's how you parse out the public teachings from the private or the tantric teachings. But I still think that there are these, they haven't been quite resolved. There are these tensions between Buddhism and psychology and between our cultures. They're interesting to me because of the role I have as a psychologist and having access to so many Dharma students. I mean, that is all I do all day is psychotherapy for Dharma students. And there are a long list of impasses and confusions and contradictions between their teachings and their practices and their real needs. And so I've created an inventory in my mind of all these questions I have about how these teachings work together. And in this particular teaching, if everything we're doing in our visualization is based on the concept of mirroring, where we first need to see ourselves in a clearer mirror in order to internalize qualities that already exist inside of us, almost like a magnet that's drawing out what is already within us, because we just have to go through this process. First, there needs to be an establishment of a decent, healthy sense of dignity. Because we are culturally working at a significant deficit than maybe the Tibetans were in a typical cultural milieu. I tried to have a discussion with this with a very seasoned anthropologist and clinical psychologist, social psychologist. She wasn't buying it. She wasn't buying that whole thing that the Tibetans had a better, more fit culture. She just wasn't part of her research. I'd like to have more than one in my sample to see if that's true. I have a sense that industrial civilization, industrial family, nuclear families have eroded the sense of necessary attunement to establish healthy attachment. And that's why our sense of self are so fragmented and so fragile. And then if you go into the Dharma communities and you too quickly jump into the selflessness teachings, I think something remains broken in us. There's what's called a spiritual bypass. Have you heard of spiritual bypassing? So I think every Dharma center across the nation should have classes in spiritual bypassing. Absolutely, absolutely. It would be a community service initiative to have trained psychologists give classes on trauma and spiritual bypassing to alert people to the fact that one of the greatest motivating forces in our psyche is pain avoidance, and that we will graft to spiritual practices and high spiritual teachings like selflessness if they mean we don't have to deal with our ugliness and our pain and our dark sides. And yet the very opportunity, there is an opportunity there to actually work with this. We have communities set up to provide enough love and care for us who have been orphaned by broken families. I mean, these could be surrogate communities for us to become healthier. They could be turned into that. You know, it's not just sucking at the teat of Geshe Sashi Sering. We could be maternal to each other in ways that most of us haven't had a safe place to fall apart, instead of showing you how capable and competent and amazing I am on my Instagram feed. You could see how disturbed I am and how frightened I am, and I may be going through a divorce and I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And enough people could really, in your Dharma community, hopefully this is already happening, but imagine if that was a conscious effort in your Dharma community. to make it safe havens so that you can get and receive the non-judgmental care and attunement that may have been lacking in our culture elsewhere. And then, once a sense of dignity is there, then it's because I don't think it's about destroying the ego. From a psychological point of view, that would be senseless, because the ego is absolutely necessary. Destroying the ego is what happens when you have a psychotic event. Destroying the ego is certainly not what the aim should be. It's having flexibility. That's more what it should be. You have to have enough ego strength, enough dignity and self-worth to then also feel like you don't need as much reinforcement anymore. If that's not established, then you're constantly, greedily, secretly trying to find ways to feed yourself. Once you have some nourishment and you can nourish yourself, then the teachings on not being so self-absorbed or having this rigid identity to put your building post in is necessary. Then you can turn your attention to other things. Questions about that? That's why I'm mic'd up and recorded. I don't know what I'm saying half the time. So sadly, we have to discuss what we're going to do, because we have 5 minutes to lunch, and I do want to get you into lunch on time. And we still have a few more steps. The disclosure is okay? We got the point about disclosure. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, do you know about the negativity bias in your brain? Huh? Yes? You know that your brain, through evolution, has been hardwired to focus on the negative in order to secure survival? But in the process, it has negated or it avoids all the good signals and the good messaging? And that part of your mindfulness or attentive practice training is to stop and smell the roses, because there are plenty of roses beneath you, even though there's a couple of wars too. And so you have to recalibrate your evolutionary wiring, because we are now in a place where we don't have saber-toothed tigers chasing us. We don't have to be so on guard, even though Fox News is trying to keep you paranoid. So celebrate your victories. We don't do it enough. And we don't feel worthy enough, and then the society says, well, that's self-absorbed and you're so narcissistic and all of this. But it's actually a good thing to bathe your mind like a tea bag in the hot water of your virtue. Because once you start doing that, you reasonably start to feel like you're a decent person. Not only, and it's a counterbalance to first you focus on the negative where you need help, but then you realize you're also doing a good job. So you're giving yourself the internal reward that you were seeking other people. Now you're saying, that was great. Not like I'm the greatest, but like, you're okay. It's okay to be okay. And then suddenly start going, well, everybody's doing an amazing thing. There's this ability that we have as human beings called vicarious joy, which is, even though you might not be feeling it, if you see somebody light up their face, you have mirror neurons that allow you to empathically enjoy and savor the benefits of their success. And if we could really embrace that, think about if we were keenly aware to the successes of anybody having a success in any given moment, and it would keep us buoyant, then we wouldn't have to be so focused on our individual sense of success. We could always just be like a radar. Who's having a good day? Let me tune into them station. And we could feel their success. Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, look, this one got married. Oh, look, this one got a graduation. Oh, this one did a great long retreat. How wonderful. Oh, look, Shitenzen Zopa led a pilgrimage. Oh, I wasn't on it, but look at all the students had a wonderful time. Instead of, oh, I didn't get to go.
I think ethics, for me personally, is really helpful with that. It's like, when you align with the teachings, like, rather than celebrate my own, or maybe I don't have a good gauge of what my success stories or my victories would be, but as I started to live slightly different ethics and enjoy those, and they were aligned with the teachings and everything started to make sense, it was
Yeah.
I could rejoice in that and then see that in other people. I'm like, oh, we're kind of all doing good stuff. And it's not, hi, Sam's doing something really great. It's like, yeah, I'm doing that too. And that was able to feel good.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. It's an internal reinforcement contingency where you do something good and it feels good and makes you want to do it again because you stop to celebrate it. Maybe at first it's a little like when you hang out with the lamas, and they do amazing things, but don't they often say, "Oh, I stop," and they say, "Oh, I rejoice. I'm spending time. Oh, you did that. That's so great. Oh, I'm feeling so happy for you."
When does it develop into pride, though, which becomes a negative?
Yeah, that is a conversation maybe we can have after lunch. Yeah, that's a tricky one. Because I can't tell you that's a tricky one. I can tell you I'm always deceiving myself. My mind is a naughty little bugger.
What was the term you used for rejoicing again? And the one that you used the term towards reinforcing the thing?
A reinforcement contingency?
Yeah.
A positive reinforcement Pardon me?
The one which is equivalent to rejoicing. But from the psychology, kind of used.
It's gone. It's disposable. It's in and out. It's on the recording, yeah. Can we sneak in one more? Okay, so this is when you're asking your mentor to bless your mind. So when you receive the rainbow lights, the recognition that we can't do it on our own. But it's a very interesting tension. Last night we talked about, some teachings talk about acceptance and some talk about the change. And those people that are saying, well, what's Buddhism? What's the truth about Buddhism? Is it about acceptance? It's all about acceptance. It's too simplistic. There are all these complexities. I mean, the more you go into it, the more complicated things, the higher order of complexity things have when you go down the rabbit hole. And this is another one of those things, which is you can't make it alone, but you also can't get fixated on dependency. So there's this tension between being receptive and open to growth because you're not enlightened. You have the potential to be enlightened, but you're not there yet. And so being around someone who is at the very least a little bit more enlightened than you means that they can guide and you can download something. But then you have to be careful not to just get held on to their coattails and expect them to take you for the ride. What's the next one? Okay, and the final one, the second to the last one is that through evolution, we have lost everybody. We have an evolutionary memory of people dying, and we buttress against that by not getting too attached. But ancient cultures always have a respect for lineage, and they have a respect for ancestors. In a way, people don't die. They remain active in the imagination, or they remain active in commemorations. And so what that does is erode the fear, and it increases the viability of you getting access to this lineage and historical guidance across time, and even if people depart from this realm, the physical realm. It opens the parameters of you to be able to stay connected, essentially. And so in order to minimize the sense that, oh, I'm going to lose my Geshe Tashi Zering's going to leave, I'm going to be all alone, abandonment complex from evolution. You imagine that the entire lineage never disappears. They're actually installed like a seed in your heart. So that you can always access your grandma, even though she's not there, and her tenderness. And Geshe Tashi Sering, and I can tell you right now in my entire time being here with you, Geshe Tenzin Zopa is with me. He's right there. Now, usually I'm much more fiery, but after having 2 weeks with Geshe Tenzin Zopa, I'm a little more subdued. Okay, and the final one. Okay, this is a big topic, what is dedication? But just imagine that in the course of our morning together, studying, even doing the Heart Sutra in the morning, studying about the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya, studying about mirroring and evolution, and awakening, these things are extremely beneficial. And they create a sense of energetic potency. And that potency, karmically speaking, could be the cause for some future moment of happiness, but they could easily just be mundane senses of happiness. We'll have to spend a karma class on this. If you don't earmark it and designate it for a particular purpose, that kind of energetic potency could just be the cause for something very short-lived. So at the end of every teaching, you earmark it by using a conscious demarcation that the energy we accrued together shouldn't be dispersed for just an ordinary, mundane experience of happiness. It should be dedicated to our purpose of awakening for the benefit of others. And that infuses that energy or that charge into a particular purpose. You have to have an expanded notion of energy in order to appreciate this kind of thing. And I think our modern scientific reductionistic paradigm, this is all woo-woo. Gets to be too woo-woo. But we can maybe talk about that after lunch. Please enjoy your lunch. What's a fair amount of time for lunch, please? Around here, are there enough places to go?